Group, I'm sorry. This is take two. My first video didn't upload for some reason. So much for technology. Anyway, I need to run this little video by you this morning first thing as we begin the second marking period. And so this is going to be basically take two. And so here we go. In terms of grading, guys, you'll see on the last couple of assignments that I've begun to tighten up. So having taught you certain procedures and protocols, particularly we're talking about annotations here, I began to tighten up on the grading where I look at specific elements, certain elements of what I had taught you, and I look for those on the particular piece that we're grading here. Forgive me, let me grab my glasses real quickly here. So with that said, some of your grades were, not as good as they have been. That's because you were missing certain elements. So for instance, like the vocabulary and the objectives on that latest assignment you got back on the development of commerce and towns, many of you didn't do anything with that. You didn't pay any attention to it. I know that there were vocabulary terms, and there are about 6 of them that I identified that you probably needed to have marked, or at least a few of those. And then in terms of questions, there's no way you could be engaging in that internal dialogue without posing questions. You're always thinking, you're always looking to make relationships, connections. And to do that, you have to be formulating questions in your mind, answering those questions. So though you have to be more demonstrative about that, you have to have those on paper so that I can see that you fully understand those elements of that comprehension process. So let's work on that. Let's be more intentional with elements like analysis, vocabulary, questioning. The last thing about grading is, as we finish the marking period, some of you struggled with your grading your grades this marking period, and there were elements that you could have done better on. Some of you could have turned in more assignments. Some of you could have been in class more often. Some of you, simply put, need to put forth greater effort. You understand, if you don't pass this class, the first semester you would have to try to recoup credit at the same time that you're taking second. And the second semester is much more demanding. We move at a much quicker pace. So you don't want to put yourself in that position to do so. So I really encourage you, please let's make this second quarter stronger and let's bump those grades up, particularly those of you who are in a top position. So now I want to turn my attention real quickly to the element of what will be on the test. And what I'll do is highlight different features of the Middle Ages, talk to you a little bit about those, and using your vocabulary and your objective sheet, you should be able to prep out for this test in a thorough fashion. You'll get some time in class, but I would spend about an hour tonight in terms of getting ready for that. So the first thing I'd like to take a look at is making sure that you understand that the two great institutions, the two great power brokers of this period, feudalism and the church. For each, you need to understand how they acquired power, how they organized that power, what they did with it, how they protected themselves with it, and how it changed the world of Europe, and how in reorganizing, rebuilding that power, they created something vastly different than the Roman world. They created the institutions and the ideas of the Middle Ages that will be sort of that midpoint in terms of putting back some of the ideas of the Hellenistic world, the ancient Greeks, and the Roman Republic in particular. Elements that you would have to understand, manorialism, how power was structured from a top-down model, events and developments like the Crusades and how they fit in and were an example. That tension between the two great powers, feudalism and the church, and how often it was a symbiotic relationship, but yet there was tension between the two. So Do be attentive to the vocabulary and the various elements, but the key is to understand these big ideas, how this was a regressive system, there to protect the status quo, how individualism and how alternative thought and ideas were not welcomed in this world. Those are the big ideas you want to walk away with. Going along with this would also be, for instance, as you have a reaction against that, you have urbanization and the development of nation states. Looking first at the formation of towns. Towns as the engine of growth, as the engine of progress, have allowing people greater freedom, more opportunity to acquire wealth, and then ultimately with wealth, their desire for political power. So moving forward to like the development of cities, you had city councils, you had charters, you had an attempt to become more autonomous, to have a greater say, to have greater opportunities in town, and that becomes then an engine for some of the ideas that will begin to percolate and eventually mature as we go into these other periods of like the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, which is the foundation, the philosophical foundation of the great revolutions, the American and the French. But this is, you have to understand, this is a sort of a stair-step process, and you have to understand how these ideas of individualism, economically, politically, socially, how they begin to stair-step and to build upon one another. That's essential to understanding how we end up with something brand new like the United States and the foundation of that, the American Revolution. So towns, began to emphasize education and economy, finance, commerce, skilled trades. So those are huge developments that push against the world of feudalism and the power of the church. And then lastly, as kings begin to accrue power, they are going to push back against the church. They're going to demand greater power. They're going to realize that perhaps we don't need the church and that we can do this on our own. But to do this on their own, they needed the people. So the ideas of nationalism, of citizens seeing themselves as a part of something different, a nation as an Englishman, a Frenchman, a Spaniard. That was a brand new idea to them because they had never felt that. They had, going back, 1,000 years, Roman citizens. But to them, that was somewhat detached, and Rome was so far away. Yes, they were Catholics as part of the church. Yes, they may belong and be under the power of a particular lord, but the concept of being a citizen of a particular nation and then that providing a particular identity for you of who you were, of what you wanted, and what you would do, that was a concept of nations. That instrument being used by the monarchs and the kings would be used to shift that power away from the church and feudalism and back to a more a smaller organization, that being the towns and then the nation states. So guys, make sure you're attentive to the timelines. Timelines only as it, for example, if I ask you when were the invasions of the Northmen, you wouldn't put the invasion of the Norsemen from, the period of the High. You would put that in the period of the Dark Ages. If you had something like the formation of city-states, well, that's a development, by and large, of the High Middle Ages. So simply know where these biggest movements fit within the period, those three periods of the Middle Ages. I wish you well on the test, and it will take you the whole period, I would imagine, to finish the vast majority. Wednesday, we will start this next unit, which will be the Renaissance, which is a vastly, vastly different period than the one that we just looked at, the Middle Ages. I hope this particular video uploads, and probably next time that we visit will be somewhere around on Wednesday, I would expect. Have a good day, and I wish you well as you